I think it's fair to say that the 80s is still very much in vogue. Everywhere you look, from film, television, music, games, the lingering scent of Aquanet and scratch and sniff stickers have permeated popular culture over the past few decades. In regards to the digital frontier we call the internet, the aesthetics of the time have manifested in various subspaces, pining over a decade that most users had never even experienced. The popularity of Vaporwave, Simpsonwave, and Synthwave exemplify this long-standing fascination, however, often while taking impressionistic, heavily exaggerated forms. The presentation of the 80s is, to say the least, a very exaggerated one. Some time ago, when I was looking at the comments in a Synthwave compilation, one commenter provided a pretty succinct description of this phenomenon. To paraphrase, much of contemporary nostalgia wave music encapsulates an idealized version of the decade, envisioning how the 80s should have felt and sounded for those alive at the time. Now sure, you could search up one of the many greatest hit compilations for the era on YouTube or Spotify to find your fair share of undeniably 80s tunes. But it's likely that the majority of these track listings will be American or English in origin. It goes without saying that there's a much bigger world out there, and many have already started taking the time to peruse beyond the Anglosphere in search of more music produced by other countries, with Japan's city pop being a particular favorite. Yet, there is an often neglected subgenre that amplifies the synth-heavy neo-Anglaise decadence of the era in a way like no other. Something that is able to live up to our fervorous, nostalgic vision of a time over 40 years past. Something that, were it not for its authenticity, one might dismiss as brazen parody, a too perfect culmination of every trope and novelty of the time that could only result from the privilege of almost half a century's worth of hindsight. Of course, I'm talking about Eurodisco. So what is Eurodisco exactly? In the context of this video, Eurodisco will refer to the general output of European disco music from the mid-70s all the way to the late 80s. Self-explanatory, right? Well, the reason I bring this up is because of a derivative form of Eurodisco known as Italodisco. One might assume the distinction between both to be intuitive. One pertains to Italian disco music, and the other to disco within the broader scope of continental Europe. However, Italodisco has a particularly distinct sound that stands out from its more nebulous counterpart. Because of this, you might occasionally come across Eurodisco tracks marked under the Italo label based on vibes alone. Hence, for the sake of this video, I'll be excluding the Italian market from the discussion and taking into consideration the country of origin for featured artists. Semantic discourse aside, there is a good chance that you're already familiar with some Eurodisco, albeit earlier entries in the genre's catalog. Popular acts such as Germany's Boney M, Dschinghis, Spain's Baccara, or Sweden's favorite palindromic quartet, ABBA, are still well known even today, but are more reminiscent of the disco of the 70s. For one reason or another, a lot of the music in the subsequent decade failed to make an impression stateside. The gap between the Eurodisco of old and new was bridged with the gradual introduction of synthesizers in popular music, with songs like Giorgio Moroder and Donna Summer's I Feel Love being indicative of this shift in sound. While the funk of the 70s didn't entirely disappear in Eurodisco, it was rendered mostly relevant once the 80s rolled in. Alright, we've defined our scope a little bit more clearly, so let's examine some of the core fundamentals of the genre. As with any music recorded in this time, Eurodisco is a primarily synth-heavy genre driven by a typical 4-on-the-floor beat. You have all the typical subdivisions in their respective places, a consistent 4-beat pattern from the kick, with some occasional variation, an alternating snare hit, and maybe a cabasa or a hi-hat providing a complementary accenting rhythm. Take out a Lindrum or a Simmons STSV, lather everything in a generous amount of reverb, and you'll have a basic beat. But what about the harmonic content? Arguably the second most important element in Eurodisco, or disco in general, is the bass, with the most common bass line used being something I like to refer to as the jumping or bouncing octave pattern, where the bass alternates between a single note that is first played low and then on a higher register, typically in a sequence of eighth notes. Now you can go ahead and pull out your favorite period-appropriate synthesizer, like an EMU emulator or Prophet V, throw in a CMI orchestra hit somewhere, and hey, you got a whole song. The subject matter for most songs are just about the same all across the board, consisting of mawkish arias of romance, hedonism, or in true 80s fashion, the mysteries of the Orient. Yeah, it can get really ridiculous. Surprisingly, or unsurprisingly, a good chunk of the Eurodisco discography is in English, likely stemming from an attempt to make a more palatable product for international audiences, and hey, clearly worked to some extent. The lyrical quality and their delivery are generally consistent, with the English being pretty spot on in most places. When held under closer scrutiny, there are of course a few quirks here and there, but nothing that can be considered too weird. Well, usually.
Transition.
From my observations, the European output in the 80s had a somewhat slow start. It didn't really reach its full form until 1985. After hitting the high point for the decade, many of the era's highlight tracks and artists began to subsequently emerge. The most successful Eurodisco act at the time, Germany's Modern Talking, would release their first album in April of that year. It's important to bring Modern Talking to the conversation because of songwriter and producer Dieter Bohlen, one of the most pivotal figures of the scene. Following the success of their first album, the duo were catapulted into the spotlight, where they spent the next 2 years milking their good fortune with not 1, not 2, but 5 follow-up albums until their breakup. No, it didn't matter that the song structure was exactly the same across each album, most of them still went platinum. And we thought the yearly COD cycle was bad. Regardless, Bohlen became one of the pillars of the Eurodisco sound, allowing him to proliferate his signature style of songwriting, producing for other successful acts like CC Catch, Blue System, Bonnie Tyler, and Chris Norman, maintaining a career well into the current decade, for better or for worse. But who else was there? If you look beyond Bohlen and his many productions, some of the other big hitters of the time include Bad Boys Blue, Desireless, Sandra, Silent Circle, Fancy, or Joy. With the exception of Desireless, they're also all from Germany. So who else is there? It is at this point that we start moving into niche territory and taking a glimpse at some of the many hidden gems of the genre. Some small fries of note include Zwischenfall, KB Caps, Roxanne, Joy Peters, Danuta Lotto, Patty Ryan, Jessica, The Twins, Shipra, Lian Ross, Mozart, The Hurricanes, and the absolute GOAT himself, Spooky Voice. With this absolute bonjour of a record.
I am killing myself, killing myself, killing myself.
Otto side aside, Leslie Mandoki actually went and made a song under the supergroup Mandoki Soulmates, which is seemingly the only Eurodisco tune they did. And you guessed it, most of these artists are German. In case you couldn't already tell, Germany had quite the monopoly on the Eurodisco market. Briefly stepping outside the Germanosphere, Spain produced a few artists of note like David Lyme or Daydream. Baccara also reinvented themselves in the new age as New Baccara, or at least that's what Disco Fox 80 credits them as. From Switzerland, the repertoire continued to expand thanks to the help of Veronic and This Ray Sunshine, no piano. Sweden, believe it or not, even had a few contributions to the catalog, with the only example I'm familiar with being this guy, Uffe Soderberg. According to this Discogs list, there are a handful more out there, but honestly it's a rather meager sum. Clearly, there's a diverse body of artists, all scattered far and few between. Surely they can't have anything in common. Well, you see, like the world of music today, it is the producer who is king, and who will often have as many one-off projects tied to them as Nick Cannon does kids. If you're like me, and care enough to look at the writing and production credits, there's a chance that you'll notice the same few names popping up in one form or another. This becomes especially apparent when you look at the music hailing from the land where all Eurodisco dreams come true. Germany! Axel Breitung, Mike Mareen, and Luis Rodriguez were just a few of the predominant forces behind the German music scene, and are actually responsible for some of the aforementioned acts, the latter even having a whole song dedicated to him by yours truly. So if you find a song's production to be vaguely familiar, there's a good chance it's nothing more than the signature touch of a producer you didn't even know you were acquainted with. If you're looking to go down a rabbit hole, check out the production credits for a song and see how far it'll take you. Who knows? Maybe you'll find a few more songs along the way. Let's come full circle and revisit Synthwave for a minute. If you're interested in finding tracks evocative of today's nostalgia wave type music, I got you covered. To start off, I would recommend checking out Modern Talking's first album, aptly titled
The First Album.
The album has some of their best material and exudes some of the most prominent traits of synthwave, with generous splashes of reverb, bright, upfront synthesizers, and spacious percussion sprinkled throughout. If the first album isn't sufficient enough to satiate your hunger for everything all-out 80s, Silent Circle's first and last album, number 1, is The Decade Manifest, with just about every single track being pure, unadulterated 80s. I find it to be rather unfortunate they're only known for Touch of the Night, because most of the tracks stand out enough to be worthy of release as a single. It takes everything Modern Talking's debut album does and turns it up to 11, using bigger swaths of reverb, bass, and percussion that culminates in a bittersweet, nostalgic atmosphere. As far as individual songs go, Fancy's Bolero or CC Catch's Strangers by Night are both worth checking out. If you have an overall interest in exploring the Eurodisco oeuvre beyond the lens of synthwave, I'll have a playlist containing all of the songs I've just mentioned and more linked in the description. But wait! I hear you say. What about Italy? With all its bizarre, colorful, brow-raising qualities, the phenomenon that is the 80s Italian disco scene warrants its own video. And believe me when I say, you won't want to miss that one. Coming up next, Italodisco. Until then, my dear viewers, so long and good night.